This is a little video on impersonal verbs and the impersonal passive. By impersonal verbs, I mean verbs like these: licet and oportuit in these sentences, which mean the first one means you may read, the second one means we had to be quiet. And by the impersonal passive, I mean verbs such as pugnatum est in this sentence, meaning for 5 days there was fighting. Now, verbs in Latin have personal endings, and these are the endings which tell you who is doing the action of the verb. So here on the left of the table, which will be very familiar to you from your earliest Latin lessons, no doubt. And just to remind you how it works, the ending tells you who does the verb. So porto, the O tells you I carry, the S is you singular, the T here in portat is the third person singular, that's he, she or it. The mus means we, that's first plural. Tis is you plural, that's second plural. And the nt ending is third plural, meaning they are carrying. Impersonal verbs don't have all these person endings, they're only used in the third person singular, and that is the ending t. The t ending is for he or she or it. So think of these impersonal verbs as meaning it is allowed, this one, or it is pleasing, plaquet. So if you put licet, which means it is allowed, together with the dative mihi, you get literally it is allowed to me, or I am allowed. And we've got the same construction for plaquet. Plaquet by itself means it is pleasing. Stick it with mihi and we get I like, literally it is pleasing to me. Now they do have an infinitive form, so it's licere for licet or placere for plaquet, and in the perfect it's licuit or placuit. So these are the principal parts of licet and plaquet. Now these two belong together because these two are impersonal verbs which take the dative. Let's now look at some which take the accusative. There is oportet, which means one ought, it's necessary, it behoves me, or in other words, I ought. There is paenitet, which means it is regretful to me, in other words, me paenitet, I regret. Me pudet, pudet means it shames, so me pudet, I am ashamed. And tidet, me tidet means I am tired of. Literally, it tires me. Many of these words have got English derivations which help us to remember what they mean. So for licet, you might remember the English word license. For plaquet, think placate. If you placate somebody, you please them. For paenitet, think penitent, someone who is ashamed to an extent. And tidet, well, the English word that comes from that is tedious. Just a reminder while we're here, if you're looking for an English word that comes from the Latin, and this is a really good important tip for if you're trying to work out what a word means and you haven't got a dictionary to hand, so you have to rely on your knowledge of English. Remember that Latin AE often turns into E in its English derivation, and that's why we get penitent from paenitet and tedious from tidet. Now, generally speaking, these impersonal verbs are used with an infinitive. So let's do some translation here. Non licet, it's not allowed. Rather a literal translation here, we'll tidy it up in a minute. Nobis for us, and exire, to go out. I will tidy up the English then by saying we are not allowed. And this second version will be better because, as you can see, it's more natural. It means the same, but it's more natural. We'll put a tick by the second version. That's the translation we prefer. It's quite a topical version, quite a topical example, I think, to choose for our time of lockdown. Now, vos oportet laborare, you must or you ought to work. Puerum paenitebat, the boy regretted vera dicere, saying the truth. Literally, it was regretful for the boy to say or to tell the truth. Now, the next one, I've stuck a little nay suffix at the end of plaquette. Sure you wouldn't let that put you off, to turn it into a question. Plaquette tibi is you like, or it's pleasing to you. So this is a question. Do you like? And then I could either finish this by saying to sing, or do you like singing? Either is perfectly good. Now, they're not all followed by an infinitive, and there is one example which isn't. This is the word accidit, it happens. And after accidit we have ut with the subjunctive. So here's an example. It happens. It's a bit rather a literal translation, but it will do as a working model. That audiant, they hear us. The present subjunctive there is used, of course, which I hope you recognise by the A in audiant. Now, it happens that they hear us is fine, but you can also tidy it up and say they happen to hear us, if you wish. Both probably equally acceptable to an examiner, so it's up to you to choose. Now, onto the impersonal passive. And this is where you have some verbs which are used in the passive in an impersonal form. Well, the impersonal form of the verb uses the third person. So these are verbs which are used in the third person passive. Here's an example, probably the most frequently used one, pugnatur. Or in the past, let's put it in the perfect, pugnatum est. The perfect passive, remember, uses the perfect passive participle, the PPP, plus the verb to be. And because this is impersonal, I've got the PPP in the neuter form. So how do we translate these? Well, pugnatur literally means it is fought. So we might change that slightly to say there is fighting, or there's fighting going on. I might also want to say a battle is fought, because that's the most likely sort of fighting there is. A battle is fought. Or of course, if you've got the past used, pugnatum est, we would say a battle was fought. Other examples, clamatum est. There was shouting. Perventum est. Literally, there was arriving, which really doesn't sound very natural. So, they arrived. We'll leave it up to the reader to work out who. They arrived. One arrived, you might even say. People arrived. Now, the impersonal passive is relatively rare because it doesn't work with most verbs. But the sort of word that it works for are intransitive verbs. Now, an intransitive verb is a verb which doesn't have a direct object. Most verbs do have a direct object or can have a direct object. So if I use the word read, I could use it without a direct object. What are you doing? I'm reading. But I could use it with a direct object. I'm reading a book. But there are words which don't have a direct object. So arrive is a good one. I can't arrive a house. I can't arrive a place. I simply arrive. Most verbs of motion, again, are intransitive. Come, go, they don't have direct objects. But the intransitive verbs which are most frequently used in Latin in the impersonal passive are the ones on this slide here. Most typically pugnatur and pugnatum est. So do be on the watch for those.